So the first thing to say about what happened in Russia in June is that there's a lot we don't know. And at the same time, as it was happening and shortly after, numerous experts were throwing around a lot of definitive claims without a lot of evidence. Let me tell you what I believe happened based on the current best information that we have. This was not a coup, but an insurgency and a protest aimed mainly at the Russian military, but not directly at Putin. This was not a planned effort at a change of regime, but as one analyst called it, a brief but spectacular rebellion. But the incident exposed and or reminded us of several things. While many of us thought of or referred to the Wagner Group as a parastatal military group advancing Russian foreign policy in many parts of the world, we didn't know, we didn't know then, but now we know because Putin stated it. After the fact, the Russian government has paid billions of dollars to the Wagner Group. That hadn't been public before. The focus on Wagner also reminded us or exposed us to the fact there are numerous other so-called private military groups in Russia. And I say private because these are all groups associated with state-owned institutions. So for example, the Russian state gas company, Gazprom, has several military or militarized units available to it. It reminded us also that Putin has levels of security that actually make a coup unlikely, including two types of Praetorian guards that are chosen and kept because of their loyalty, and the numbers of those troops are in the tens of thousands. Now, what was remarkable about the events was that no one stopped the Wagner Group as it rolled down the highway. In fact, they seemed to have taken out some Russian helicopters, or there were Russian military casualties. His men briefly seized military facilities in Rostov-on-the-Don and in Voronezh. But the march also didn't snowball or gain forces. It was not as if over the hundreds of miles or kilometers that they traveled, as they seemed to be approaching Moscow, that they grew in force. They did not. So they were allowed to pass, but they didn't pick up a lot of steam. That's a level of sort of public disconnect or disaffection that is very interesting and an ambiguous signal that we need to keep our eye on. And in some ways, you could go either way. Either it could flip and people start to engage, people stay disaffected, we don't know. Also unexpected and remarkable was the Lukashenko move. The longtime dictator of Belarus surprised everyone. He's often written off as Putin's poodle, but there he was cutting this deal. And also of note, instead of following through on a criminal case, Putin, who'd called out Prigozhin as a traitor, but then granted him exile. What was that about? Meanwhile, Alexei Navalny, the anti-corruption crusader, rots in a gulag for exposing corruption on YouTube. Vladimir Kara-Murza sits in a gulag for calling out Russia's war in Ukraine a war. By the way, there were reports today, July 5, that Prigozhin has gone back to St. Petersburg, that he's returned to Russia, and that he is saying that he and his troops will return to the front line of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. It's hard to know if any of that is accurate. Circling back to where I began, do be aware of instant analysis. The honest answer was that no one had a clue what was going on, and events unfolded very quickly. We still don't know a lot. That said, this all seemed mainly about contracts and money. On June 10th, the Ministry of Defense announced that by July 1, everyone, all these parastatal groups, had to contract up, if you will. They had to sign up with the Ministry of Defense. That explicit move to come under Ministry of Defense control seems to have driven Prigozhin to do what he did. And that came after weeks, if not months, of Prigozhin making public comments disparaging the Russian Ministry of Defense and their behavior, their war fighting in Ukraine. Finally, lots of folks at the time were saying everything has changed in Russia, when in reality, while there was a little bit of unraveling or daylight exposed, Putin is still in charge. Has he been weakened? a bit perhaps. At least he's been exposed as not being all-knowing, but there's no one obvious to replace him. So the chances of regime change anytime soon seem very remote. But the more violent and clear threats to him come not from liberals or Democrats who sit bravely in jail, but from far-right forces, the ultranationalists who want even more brutality from this regime and the annihilation of Ukraine. And it is these people we must all fear because they are a threat to democratic forces and international law that has helped keep peace in Europe for decades. Thanks so much.